candy at your local convenience store was upwards of $20 in some zip codes. And that was largely because the price of cocoa last year was a little bit crazy. It was one of those commodities that we can't really produce or manufacture in the US, which means that we're reliant on imports and we're reliant on sourcing overseas. And that sourcing was really impacted a lot by tariffs. And so I think we saw that, the price was really high last year, and a lot of these manufacturers had overstock from chocolate because of that, because the prices were high and, trends around GLP-1 usage, people wanting to eat less sugar, Red 40 and a lot of the dyes, there's been a lot of press around those dyes being phased out. So just heightened consumer awareness around this category of chocolate and candy. Now we've seen that, manufacturers want to put those products out earlier and get consumers hyped up earlier in the hopes of kind of retaining sales that we've seen in past years that are currently affected by all of those trends I just mentioned.
One of the interesting things to me is last year we had a lot of knee-jerk reaction around the tariffs, the trade policy, and a lot of uncertainty there. Is there any differences that you're seeing this year compared to last year in some of the summer return volumes or the overstocks?
Yeah. The main thing that we're seeing is just that retailers and manufacturers, like I mentioned, they pushed a lot of their planning cycles and their inventory procurement cycles earlier in the year. That May was really the peak in terms of imports. And like I mentioned, I feel like we're actually going to see that imports are going to decrease the rest of the year, what that means for us as American consumers is that all of the inventory that we're going to have this year may already be within the US. Like we're already seeing that inventory being put out that we may not need to buy till September or October, November, but it's already either in the distribution centers or it's slowly starting to be put out on the shelves earlier. So we're seeing that overstock volumes are already high because there's already been more inventory that's been, pushed out there. And we've seen that currently consumers are pulling back their spending a little bit, like this month and last month. We've seen a slight decrease in spending due to a number of factors you previously mentioned, immigration, political challenges, political disruptions. I think in the food and beverage space specifically, GLP-1 continues to be a huge trend. It is really changing how Americans are consuming at their, quick restaurants and fast food scene, as well as at their grocery stores. What are they choosing to pick up from the shelves? What are they buying? What brands are doing really well because of this? What brands are really having to reformulate and choose what options or what flavors should they procure, and should they, offer it to consumers instead, just given that trends are changing so much?
So, Amrita, I'm interested in two thoughts here, and I want to go two different directions. First one is Gene Soroka, the Port of LA director, disagrees with what you're saying. He believes that we're going to be a very robust second half. He doesn't think there'll be a slowdown in imports. Your perspective is that a lot of the imports are already there, therefore will be a slowdown. What makes you believe that that's the case versus what Gene is telling us?
I think that in the food and beverage space, like GLP-1 is one really big trend, right? We're seeing that upwards of depending on the segment, and there's a lot of Americans who are procuring GLP-1 not directly, so they're not even included in the data because they're buying off of websites that, don't have the same FDA oversight. Americans are really being picky with what they're buying, with when they're buying. And I think this extends even beyond food, right? Like the same kind of behaviors that people have around eating and around the joy that they get from eating. We're seeing that's impacting it's going to impact, if it hasn't already, other forms of what people buy, right? We're seeing a decrease in addiction. So I have a thesis that, given what we've seen with overstock and given that peak in May, and given the trends with the way that consumer behavior is occurring due to GLP-1, and we're also seeing increased peptide use. Like I'm here in the Bay Area, and it's a really big thing is peptide use right now, and a lot of discussion around how does that impact the dopamine pathways. I think that a lot of consumer segments, even beyond food, are going to have to think about how they need to reformulate or remarket their products to consumers who have less of a shopping addiction or less of a tendency or an inclination to buy these things because they're feeling less joy from this. So I think the research is really interesting around that. And I think also the fact that retailers are putting out the Halloween and the holiday items earlier. Like I think Christmas decorations and Christmas items are going to come out a lot earlier this year as well for the same reasons I mentioned. retailers don't want to risk getting to the end of the year and they've put items out on the shelves and people no longer have the budget, or they're not getting their end of year like Christmas bonus to be able to buy those items. That's one reason why the retail industry is like, we need to put items out earlier, because we want to, capture consumers when they have the disposable income to be able to purchase. I think that's one of the reasons why I think that imports are going to slow the rest of the year.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I am a proud user of Monjero. I've been on it for a couple of years, and it does. One of the, she highlights this, is the riskier behaviors. Even some Wall Street hedge funds have actually don't like their people being on GLP-1s, because the normal dopamine drivers, the risk taking is mitigated. I'm a pilot, and one of the planes I fly is considered a high risk. It's the Icon. I'm selling it because I just don't have the awareness. It's such a strange. And then we get to rest. Was it rest? I always mispronounce this one. The rest of all, Retta, as they say. That one apparently really trips you out from, like, you don't take any dope, like you don't like any risk. Like, it's completely.
What do? Sit in a room?
You talk about freight, Zach, all day long. That's what we do here.
Yeah.
But we're not taking the risks that you normally would take.
I mean,
it is, and even talked about like falling in love. Like, this stuff is. We can do a whole show, and Rita, we just got to have you at F3 in October to talk about this, because it's one of the most interesting psychological changes to our economy.
Yeah.
That is so underappreciated, is just the behavioral changes that she's highlighting.
So, I mean, are we talking about like a muted holiday shopping spree? Are we seeing lower orders? What's the big takeaway here? If we don't have the shopping ability or capability that we once had, are we thinking that some of these inventory levels are overstocked to the point where we're not going to need them, and we're going to see this huge amount of returns, Amrita?
I think last year we saw a big return season. Like, I went on a few shows last January. I even went on the day after Christmas to CBS and I spoke about this. Like, returns the last few seasons have been high. Retailers are coming up with new policies. I mean, some of the policies that we've seen is, consumers have to pay for returns. Retailers are, and even like e-com sites, like the D2C brands, they're tracking the number of returns you now do if you get above a threshold. And the threshold is a complex formula, right? It's not the same thing for everyone. If you're returning, expensive $3,000 beds, that's completely different from returning like a $20 pair of shoes or something. Retailers and D2C brands may look to ban you or to put you on some sort of list. I have family friends who've, been banned from returning on random websites. Like, this isn't even like a well-known retailer. It's just a random outdoorsy brand that they're a fan of because they've bought too much stuff. So I've seen it happen. We're seeing that retailers have a heightened awareness of how much returns are costing them. It costs them in terms of processing, in terms of putting it back into the warehouse, the whole grading process. I work directly with a lot of retailers that are investing quite a bit of money into figuring out how do you grade products, because, we're seeing a ton of returns from holiday seasons and then also just throughout the year, right? Returns overall have gone up quite a bit. And how do retailers assess what is able to be put back on shelves and you can sell it at full price versus, what cannot be sold? What is potentially damaged? Can that be liquidated? Can that be donated? For certain categories where it cannot be sold safely to consumers, can we repurpose it? So one really interesting example we've seen is like expired crackers can be repurposed as food for hog farmers. Or for animals on farms. So we're looking into that right now. We have some retail partners who are really interested in using a lot of this excess food and beverage product, whether it's, packaged food or fresh food, as animal feed. So I think there's a heightened awareness that this return problem is costing the industry money. It is a sustainability problem to a very large extent, right? A lot of returns, the data shows 45 to 50% of returns of e-com returns go to landfill. They don't even go back to the warehouse. They never go back on shelves. And I think a lot of Americans are not aware of that. And our country has a kind of culture around returns that we don't see in Europe. We don't see this with our, customers or the retail partners that we see in Europe, where that culture isn't there, where people will buy, 10 prom dresses and then they decide that they're going to return 9 of them. And we're seeing this happen with not even just clothes, but makeup products as well, right? Where a lot of beauty brands are like, you can buy 10 different shades and you only keep the one that you want. Well, what happens to the other 9 shades of foundation that you've, swatched once? Like, it's not safe for retailers to be able to sell all of those different shades. So what do they do with that product now? So I think we need to have a kind of conversation around this in the industry, because from a freight perspective, this is more inventory that's sitting in the warehouse. It's more inventory that needs to be transported, more cars on the road. It's an energy problem. It's a cost problem, and it's something that we can really seek to make more efficient.
Well, it's interesting. You're talking about retailers or e-commerce companies are very sensitive to returns. Someone use it once and then return it. I bought a backpack, and I noticed there was a tag on it that it actually has, if you remove this tag, it's yours. Yeah. You can't return it. And it was interesting because it was a really obnoxious tag. Like, it was very intentional of being like, it's yours. Mm-hmm. You bought it, kind of thing, which I thought was a really interesting take, the way that they handled it. But I guess it highlights what you're talking about, is that consumers will try something, maybe have it for a bit and just return it, and then all of a sudden you miss the sell.
Well, from the logistics perspective, returns are nightmarish. Having worked for an LTL company, we would send a truck around to pick up all these returns, and it was very non-economical.
Especially in the carpet business.
Yeah, but everything was
custom.
I mean, you think about it, most logistics networks are designed to go one direction. And so the returns process, this fascinates me, because I want to hear more about what Satira does to help this process. Real quick.
Yeah, so what Satira does specifically for a lot of the excess inventory that we work with is we're really big right now on the backhaul process. So you mentioned, a lot of logistics is meant for forward logistics. And, a lot of the big retailers, they have backward logistics teams. They have entire operational workflows for this, right? But your average D2C brand or smaller retailer, especially in a lot of these categories we're talking about where there aren't returns, but they have some level of excess, that excess needs to go somewhere. So how can we develop a backward logistics system that is not, crazy expensive? A lot of the companies we work with, their warehouses pay $1 to $2 in processing just to scan in a single unit or a single item. And if you think about it, that kind of adds up, right? Because what if it's a small item that only has an MSRP of $8 and you've paid $1 to $2 just to put it back into the warehouse, and you may not be able to sell it again. So we're looking a lot at backhaul processes. If we have a truck that is going between 2 warehouses on a regular basis, can it come and can it consistently pick up the excess and transport it to nonprofits along the way, drop it off at the nonprofits? You get the tax paperwork, you can go and kind of declare a tax deduction. Our company does a lot of impact reporting on the impact of distributing excess inventory out to these kinds of nonprofits, right? Companies are willing to pay us for this data because they want to be able to share that with the general public in their investor reports, with Americans, and say, hey, our donations have reached American consumers in all of these zip codes and all of these states. We've reached people of these different demographics, and this is the good that we're doing. And this is kind of how we're rerouting our excess inventory. That even when excess inventory and returns need to be landfilled, it still has to be transported somewhere. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that you're still paying a freight cost to transport it to where it is going to be disposed of or discarded. And obviously, if it's hazmat suit destruction, a lot of the categories we work with in CPG, beauty, makeup, health and wellness, even some food categories, they may require hazmat suit destruction. So that's really expensive. So if we can just transport that and be able to route it to eligible nonprofits, or obviously our eligible buyer network, in a way that is efficient and isn't super logistically complicated, that is a big value add for our customers.
So essentially, you've figured out a way to almost make money, or allow those businesses to make money. I mean, the tax write-off component of this is fascinating to me. It's normally a cost sink. So how much, is there a specific area or industry or sector that you see the most activity in, or is it simply a retail food and beverage situation?
I think the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of excess inventory in packaged food and beverage. So we typically work with shelf-stable items. So think cereals, a lot of bars. We've worked with gluten-free bars, vegan bars, just your regular large CPG, chocolate, heavy on the added sugar, all of these different categories, a lot of overstock. I think Americans are really conscious of like I mentioned, the products that they're consuming and the products that they're eating. And there's a lot of rhetoric around the dyes being phased out. Like I saw a news article today, actually, where some of the manufacturers were promising that by end of 2026, they were going to phase out certain dyes and certain ingredients. And that to me is a little bit crazy because, there's a 9-month production cycle on average in this industry. And if you're trying to phase something out, 2026 is less than 6 months away at this point. What is going to happen to all of that excess? Because guaranteed there is going to be excess. There's already excess from that. So if manufacturers pledge that they're not going to sell products with certain ingredients, my question is, where are these products going to go? Because that's something that we can assist with. We can route those to nonprofits. We can help your company unlock a tax deduction. We can route it to the secondary market in a discreet way, working with whatever restrictions you have around geography, around, the types of buyers and the end consumers. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to kind of capture all of these different trends that are affecting the CPG and the consumables space, and a lot of these products are inevitably going to be phased out and kind of discontinued on the market.
What is hot right now? What is not excess, where retailers are doing quite well? Last time you talked about apparel, Americans are slimming down as we inject the peptides into our bodies. What are the things that are doing well right now?
I think there's a few different trends. So in the food and beverage space, we're seeing that a lot of, this is the restaurants and kind of the quick retail or the instant commerce, as well as a lot of these CPG companies we're talking about. They're really trying to put fiber into their different beverages and their different items. Like I was at a music festival this weekend and we saw a number of soda companies that were like advertising, the 3 grams of fiber and their probiotic drinks. So we're seeing a lot of general health trends that are impacting all of these different categories. In the clean beauty space, we've got a willingness from consumers to pay more for clean beauty products, for makeup wipes that don't have chemicals in them, for makeup products that aren't going to be endocrine disruptors. So there is a heightened awareness of all of the products that you consume in some ways, whether they're, health and wellness or cosmetic items that you put on your skin or products that you put into your body, right? Americans are aware that they need to be consuming more fiber. They need to be consuming more protein. And we're seeing everyone from, your local soda brand who's putting fiber in their beverages to Starbucks, who's advertising the amount of protein or the grams of protein that are in the frappuccinos and a lot of the blended beverages. So the marketing has shifted quite a bit in terms of how brands are appealing to consumers and what they think consumers want to hear.
Well, it is such a fascinating, you were one of the most fascinating guests we have on because you have such a perspective that is so unusual and unique in terms of it. And it's such a fascinating thing.
Yeah, she has a window into like a lot of the commoditization, but also like
changing consumer habits.
Yeah, like all the
economic psychology, consumer psychology that's really disrupting these entire industries.
And the returns component, you've got this added layer of warehousing, that has become increasingly a cost.
So, Amrita, where should people be placing their bets? Is apparel, is professional wear? Bloomberg had a great article that came out a couple of days ago about GLP-1 use in the workplace and how it's changing the pressure for people, younger people, in terms of have to look better, but they're dressing up. But also it's changing the workplace sexual harassment. Like, because people are saying things they shouldn't be saying.
Yeah,
like they are saying stuff that they shouldn't say. I won't repeat those lines. But Amrita, this stuff is so fascinating.
So that I haven't heard about the harassment. I would say on the style and the fashion side. So we see, on a pretty cyclical level that whenever we're kind of in a recession or we're in an economic time where, it's a little bit stagnant or the economy is not doing the best, that we see an increase in people wearing formal wear for a few reasons. A lot of it is people have less discretionary spending to be able to buy new outfits, which means that women, especially, the formal wear that they are wearing to work, they may be repurposing that to wear it to the club or to wear it to bars or just out on a day-to-day basis. So this is a legitimate trend that we see, like I mentioned, on a pretty cyclical basis, that people start to see formal wear kind of creep into different aspects of their lives, because you have to go to work, you have to own formal wear, right? But do you need to buy a new dress, to go to the club? Maybe you don't. Maybe that's where you cut back on your discretionary spending. So I think that those kinds of fashion trends, people, like we see the same thing with the lipstick index, where typically, during recessions or economic times like this, people look for small purchases that feel luxury. So they're small purchases that don't break the bank, but they have a disproportionately high increase in your quality of life. So lipstick is a really good example of that, right? Like you buy one lipstick, it brightens up your face, it brightens up your day, it makes you feel and look more put together. So that is also another trend that, economists kind of look at is, what is the lipstick index? How is this trending? I think in terms of ultra luxury, our company is kind of seeing that there is less of a consumer appetite to pay for ultra luxury. So handbags are a really good example of this. We are seeing excess within, luxury perfumes, luxury handbags, kind of everything within this category. And I think there's a few reasons. One reason is there's heightened consumer awareness that the price doesn't necessarily justify the quality, right? And we see, obviously, for handbags, it's different than perfumes. For perfumes and more of the consumable items, there's that aspect of, the actual ingredients and the health aspect of it. I'm paying more for a luxury product, but are the ingredients clean ingredients? That isn't always clear just because you're paying more. So I think the luxury industry is really kind of going through it right now, where they need to think about how can they appeal to consumers in a new way. How can they offer like a bargain line or a discounted line or a line that is maybe prestige versus being luxury. So that's something that we're seeing as a trend with a lot of the manufacturers and brands we work with, is they're seeing more excess within that luxury category, both of, apparel, accessories, and of consumable items.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing. And look, and when the economy is soft, talking about dressing up, it's where, whether it's mating prospects, increasing your economics drives so much of this. Mating prospects, you start to, you become, hey,
you pay attention to what you wear.
Yeah. And also, like, you're less willing to take risks for employment. Just fascinating conversations. Amrita, we love having you here. You're one of our favorite guests. Thanks for coming in, and look forward to hearing from you in a couple of months as to what new.
I want to hear a recap after this holiday season to see what everybody returned.
We have to have it at F3. Amrita, you need to come to F3 in Chattanooga to talk to our logistics audience about what you're seeing and talk about what you guys do for companies, because we have the right audience for that.
Let's do it.
Appreciate you coming in. Thank you so much. Coming up next, we're going to get into the supply chain and transportation M&A conversation. The freight market is showing early signs of recovery driven by more capacity leaving the system than a surge of demand. Of course, we've talked about that quite often. We're going to hear from Craig Decker, who's going to give us his perspective on infrastructure and M&A here after the break.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts. 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head-to-head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves. Today, we're going to get into the M&A conversation here with Craig Decker. He is the Managing Director of Supply Chain Logistics Transportation at Brown Gibbons Lang and Company. Welcome, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing great, Craig. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. Let's talk a little bit about the M&A sector or M&A climate right now. The freight recession has been brutal. We're coming out of it. I'd love to understand a little bit of what you're seeing right now.
It's a great question. You know, it's interesting. We've had 4 years, 4 very, very long years of hoping to get out of this, right? And I know the operators are wondering when it's going to get better for them, and frankly, it has, or starting to. And what we're hoping is that the dam unlocks a little bit, right? And we start to see some transactions occur, and they're starting. And we're starting to see it really started during the third quarter of last year, when you really started to see the truckload indices change, and you started to see some of the, some of the regulatory issues pulling drivers out of the market, tightening capacity, and that really filtered through the market. So we're starting to see sort of a resurgence in interest in M&A, and it's going across sectors, starting with brokerage and moving on to the assets.
I would assume that a lot of this resurgent M&A activity had a little bit of a spike after Montgomery Carib, or am I jumping the gun there?
Well, it's funny. It's a great question. And I get this all the time when I'm talking to folks, especially if I'm talking to someone on the supply chain management side, on TMS side. They're all concerned, right? Because the brokers are thinking, what happens to our universe? Look, this is my personal view. I think what's going to happen is you'll see a change in the brokerage universe, right, because of the insurance requirements that we're expecting. And we'll start to see some of the smaller brokers moving into larger brokers. So there'll definitely be some M&A activity there. But a lot of these guys are agents. So you look at it and say, well, am I buying a great athlete or am I buying a business? So there'll be some changes in that landscape. On the asset-based side, what we're really seeing is people are saying, I understand transport, I understand its necessity, and what I'm looking for is not necessarily just capacity or geography, but I'm looking for the type of customers or the type of carriage, i.e. specialty, right? Moving tank freight or moving reefer goods that might specialize in an end market being pharma or medical products where it's really, really sticky and with great margins. That's what folks are starting to look at right now.
So Craig, I'd love to understand what is of interest from an investor standpoint. We go through these cycles where, everybody wants non-asset. I imagine that non-asset now has a lot of overhangs, insurance questions, cost, and risks are now pronounced in ways they haven't. How is that impacting valuations?
It's funny. That's a great question, Craig. Interestingly enough, years ago, everyone was like non-asset. Why? Because there was a real PE interest in transports. And it's very hard to dedicate free cash flow to paying for replacement CapEx when you have to pay down debt, right? It doesn't help their investment metrics as quickly as they'd want. But you need assets to satisfy your customers' need, especially in a tightening market. So what we're seeing right now is folks saying, I understand the marketplace. I understand we need assets. I also understand that, EBITDA, that term we're always using as a benchmark for valuation, or one of them, right? D&A in an asset-based business is a real expense, right? It should be thought about as a cash expense because your replenishment cycle is 3 or 5 years, or if you're in LTL, it's 7-year cycle still. 1/7, or in the most draconian aspect, 1/3 of your fleet is being replaced every year. So you need cash flow. So that's the dynamic. We're starting to think about, okay, who are the strong guys? Who could survive? For those who are private investors, or whether it be family founders or PE, and they're looking for holding something with an eventual exit in the relatively near term, what they need is to know I have consistency in my revenue base. That might be contractual revenue. I have a good end market base. And that's what they have to show. So basically, they could forecast their cash flow out and almost say, okay, here's what my MOIC should be if I was to exit in 4 years based on my replacement cycle and my customer base and hopefully a strong market.
So, Craig, private equity's had a mixed track record, we'll say, in logistics. They seem to have done really well in non-asset, assuming they don't overpay for it, and there have been some cases where they've overpaid for it. Nolan Transportation, or TI, is one of those that is sort of the best example of that. But you could even argue STG. STG is more of an asset, you can call it asset light or asset intensive business. But when we get to truckload, particularly asset truckload, PE's track record is atrocious in that market. Why is it so bad? PE should stay away, in my opinion, from assets. Is it that they just misunderstand the replacement cycle? Like, what are they getting wrong that makes them absolute miserable investors in asset-based trucking companies?
So, Craig, you realize I'm an investment banker, and you're basically asking me to crash my career right now.
I know that I'm not doing you a service here because you're talking out your PE guys that are watching the show. But, we've covered this before. I can't name, outside of specialty, you get some that are in the environmental movement and the hazmat materials. I get that PE does really well in those markets, but when it comes to the commoditized truckload asset world, which are always, it seems like there's always bankruptcies that happen where these PE firms come in, fast and furious, put a lot of capital, a lot of debt on the books. They just don't survive it. What is the reason that they get it wrong?
It's a wonderful question. Again, I keep saying that, but it really is a good question because I've battled with that. When I was young in my career, I used to say, hey, PE will buy it, no problem, because it's a good business. But it's not a good business within their holding period. So that partially answers your question, Craig, in that part of it is that their lifespan of their investment or their thesis on that is 3 to 5 years. It's really too short, right? But you can manage that if you lever your business properly. And a trucking business and any asset-intensive business, in my view, should not be over-levered. I have a view on where that should be, and it really depends on the kind of freight you're carrying, kind of assets you're running, kind of replacement cycle you have, all of the things that really go into the operational aspects of the business. But it really should never be over-levered, and what you find is most of these businesses that you headlined a few of them, they were over-levered. And it's hard to get out of that, because think about this. 10 years ago, we had a zero interest rate environment for all intent and purposes. And it was very easy for a PE to get into a business, or anyone to get into a business. If it's not performing exactly the way they wanted it to, they could recapitalize out their equity and leave the business slightly